Many believe that King Ghidorah is Godzilla's arch-nemesis, considering the fact that they match perfectly in terms of abilities and prowess. But what about the accidental abomination of nature that Dr. Serizawa unwittingly created? In this marvelous video, we're going to explore the devil-like crustacean kaiju, better known as Destoroyah. What are the regrettable events that led up to his creation? How did it manage to take down the Big G's son? What are some of his abilities? Does Destoroyah even have any weaknesses? Let's find out. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Tracing the origins of Destoroyah. Destoroyah, the crustacean-like creature, first appeared in the Toho film Godzilla vs. Destoroyah, which was released in 1995. This was also said to be the last movie which came out in the Heisei period of Toho's Godzilla films. The origins of Destoroyah can, in fact, be traced back to a colony of prehistoric microscopic creatures. These were crustaceans from the Precambrian era, which lived in anaerobic environments. They had managed to survive up to the 20th century, residing in Tokyo Bay. The Oxygen Destroyer was a chemical weapon of mass destruction created by Dr. Daisuke Serizawa. It was made solely for the purpose of killing Godzilla. The plan was to immerse the Oxygen Destroyer in Tokyo Bay in a bid to kill the Big G. However, the combination of the anaerobic environment and the chemical present in the weapon began to awaken and mutate the crustacean creatures. The chemical from the weapon, which was named micro-oxygen, forced prehistoric beings to evolve rapidly during the 40 years that they were exposed to it. When the Tokyo Bay Aqualine was being built, these creatures were disturbed, and they shifted to the surface. They primarily fed on organic life that dwelled near the surface, and further mutated to form a larger creature. In the comic book series Godzilla Rulers of Earth, it is said that Destoroyah was created as a biological weapon by the Devonians. They are a fish-like race that dwells under the sea. The terrifying saga of Destoroyah. The Tokyo Bay Aqualine was built in the same place where the Oxygen Destroyer was denoted. The construction of the structure shook the creatures out of their hibernation. They ended up at the Shinagawa Aquarium, where they used the chemical compound, micro-oxygen, to break down the fish and devoured them. The ancient crustaceans eventually amalgamated into larger beasts. The grotesque creatures then proceeded to swarm the Tokyo Telecom Center. The SWAT team's weapons proved futile against the beasts, as they withstood assaults from most conventional weaponry. The only things that had an effect on the beasts were flamethrowers and grenades. Dr. Kensuke Ijuin examined the remains of the incinerated beasts and theorized that extremely high temperatures destroyed all traces of the micro-oxygen compound, which in turn steadily killed the creatures. The Japanese self-defense forces used the best chemical freezer weapons which were at their disposal against the creatures. A collection of CLT-95s, MBT-MB92, and Type 90 tanks were fired at the beasts near the outskirts of Tokyo. Another chemical weapon of mass destruction, known as the Maser Cannon, blasted several Cyro rays at the monstrous crustaceans. All the while, cadmium bombs rained down on them. The surviving creatures fused into the juvenile form of Destoroyah. This form was able to take down the Japanese self-defense forces with effortless ease. Dr. Kensuke Ijuin came to the conclusion that the source of his power wasn't the chemical micro-oxygen, but the weapon itself. Hence, the beast was knighted Destoroyah, since he was an embodiment of the Oxygen Destroyer. In a way, Destoroyah was a Kaiju Oxygen Destroyer. At this point in time, Destoroyah had further evolved and grown wings. It flew down to the capital of Japan, Tokyo, to continue his senseless killing. Meanwhile, Godzilla was nearly going to have a nuclear meltdown through what is called China Syndrome. This occurs when the core of a nuclear reactor melts through its containment and reaches the other end, which is figuratively called China, aka the other end of the Earth's surface. The G-Force was an organization created specifically to work on counter-Godzilla measures. The G-Force team was worried about the fact that Godzilla's nuclear meltdown could possibly be the end of the world. They wished to bring Godzilla to Tokyo, where Destoroyah continued to rampage, in hopes that the colossal crustacean would kill Godzilla. The physics of the G-Force summoned Godzilla Jr., Godzilla's adopted son, to the battlefield. Destoroyah set his eyes on an unknowing Godzilla Jr. and ambushed the young Kaiju. He latched onto Godzilla Jr. with his second inner jaw and injected some micro-oxygen into his veins. Godzilla Jr. was slightly poisoned, but still managed to use his atomic breath to blast Destoroyah straight into a refinery, which exploded. Godzilla Jr. then rushed to his father's side. Unfortunately, Destoroyah seemingly survived the explosion. He had also absorbed some of Jr.'s DNA, which he then used to evolve into his final form. Destoroyah's near-perfect form was a terrifying sight to behold as he made his way to where Godzilla and his son were. Destoroyah first targeted Jr. and grabbed him in his giant talons. He then skyrocketed upwards using his gigantic wings and dropped Godzilla Jr. from a great height. Destoroyah then mercilessly shot his micro-oxygen ray at Godzilla Jr., which proved to be the death of him. Leaving no time for Godzilla to process his adoptive son's death, Destoroyah dragged him into Tokyo Bay. They finally faced each other off outside Haneda Airport. Destoroyah used his deadly laser horn that was powerful enough to slice through Godzilla's flesh. Godzilla's counterattack was his signature atomic breath, which left Destoroyah's chest wounded. The Big G doubled down and fired another blast of pure radiation into the same wound. Godzilla then proceeded to punch down Destoroyah for good measure. Destoroyah was defeated and disappeared into the mist when he fell to the ground. However, several of his previous crustacean-bodied creatures ambushed Godzilla and smothered him with more micro-oxygen. Though his nuclear pulse took great care in absolutely obliterating these pesky beasts, Godzilla rushed to his deceased son's side and tried to revive him in vain. Just then, Destoroyah appeared in his perfect form yet again and blasted Godzilla with his lethal micro-oxygen ray with full force. But one concerning fact remained. Godzilla was steadily heating up to extremely high temperatures. He rapidly approached the nuclear meltdown state that everyone was in fear of. The king of the monsters emitted his infinite heat ray, which sizzled off Destoroyah's shoulder and a part of the frills on his head. He then involuntarily blasted several nuclear pulses, which also intimidated Destoroyah. The winged monster then took off into the sky to save his own skin. The Japanese self-defense forces swooped in and bombarded Destoroyah with cryo-lasers, which froze his wings and rendered him unable to fly away. He plummeted to the Earth, which had been unnaturally heated up by Godzilla, and was killed. Tracing the cataclysmic evolution of Destoroyah. Many say that Destoroyah's design was heavily inspired by a creature from another classic franchise. In appearance, Destoroyah is similar to Alien from the Aliens franchise. Even throughout his story, Destoroyah transmutated into numerous different forms and took up many variations of these during all his battles. Let's explore all the elements that make up the different versions of Destoroyah. His first form was never shown in the film. It is these slumbering creatures that are affected by the oxygen destroyer. The prehistoric marine anthropods were barely a centimeter long. The microscopic creatures were characterized by horns all along the sides of their bodies. The second form is known as the crawl form, and it looks akin to that of a horseshoe crab. The red mutated crustacean arachnid had two sharp spikes and a set of pincers. The third form of Destoroyah, which is known as the juvenile form, evolved to be wholly different. It stood on its crab-like legs and was covered in an armor of spikes. He also sported a flower-shaped opening on his chest. The juvenile Destoroyah had frills that lined his head, two eerily glowing eyes, an extendable jaw, and a long forked tail. This version was gunned down by the Japanese self-defense forces, but it evolved into something larger. The following form came to be known as the aggregate form of Destoroyah, which stood at a towering height of 60 meters. Along with all his previous parts, he had 2 crab claws protruding from his chest and 2 sharp limbs jutting out of his back. Destoroyah's final form was a deadlier one, called the flying form. As the name suggested, he sprouted 2 massive wings and could take flight. The flying form took up a more reptilian appearance. This was also when Destoroyah got his signature horned forehead. Destoroyah's flying form was the one who battled Godzilla Jr. and killed him. Destoroyah's final form, also known as his perfect form, grew 1 more set of wings. This final boss version of Destoroyah butted heads against the Big G. Destoroyah's arms evolved with 3 claws on each hand, and his forked tail also had pincers on its end. A common characteristic that all forms of Destoroyah shared was that they were all blood red in color. This feature gave him a sinister look that indicated the kind of threat he was. He looked like an evolved Dragon Balrog hybrid. Destoroyah's terrifying arsenal of powers and abilities. Destoroyah is known to be a hybrid life form, which means that he was created from several parts or elements. Destoroyah is made up of billions of microscopic life forms that eventually evolved into larger entities. As time passed, the multitudes of organisms came together to form his crawl, juvenile, aggregate, and final form. Even while he faced the risk of being killed by the Japanese self-defense forces, these scattered creatures formed one more enormous beast. This particular attribute is known as division and recombination. Fun fact, another Godzilla villain known as Hedorah also possesses the traits of division and recombination. So it seems that every time Destoroyah was supposedly defeated, he would just come back as an evolved version of himself. He even reached a point where he could switch back and forth between his flying form and his aggregate form. Destoroyah is also blessed with significant durability. He withstood several blasts from Godzilla's deadly atomic ray. Even during their final battle, Destoroyah held his own against Godzilla's spiral heat ray, the same which left Super Mechagodzilla and Space Godzilla significantly weakened. At the same time, when the King of the Monsters fought his foe, he was considered to be at his most potent, to the point where he threatened a nuclear meltdown. This meant that Destoroyah also had to be immensely strong to be able to battle Godzilla. The fact that he was able to wrap his forked tail around Godzilla's neck and drag him into the Tokyo Bay showcased his strength. Destoroyah also murdered Godzilla Jr. after being able to carry him up into the sky. Destoroyah possessed a power that was similar to Godzilla's atomic breath, the micro-oxygen beam or the oxygen destroyer ray. It was sourced from the time he was first exposed to the chemical weapon in Tokyo Bay. Destoroyah's juvenile forms were able to blast a white beam of the chemical micro-oxygen from their mandible-like mouths. First, this ray could only melt metal and incinerate organic metal. So when a juvenile Destoroyah creature aimed this beam at a human, the body fell apart instantly. The white beam came to be known as the oxygen destroyer ray once he reached his aggregate form. The ray grew into something much more destructive. It turned purple in color and took on a 3-dimensional appearance. This purple ray of death was used to wipe out swathes of the Japanese self-defense forces easily. The flying form of Destoroyah also obliterated entire parts of the city during his fight against Godzilla Jr. Destoroyah's perfect form had achieved the most powerful version of the micro-oxygen beam. He managed to slice through Godzilla's flesh and delivered the killing blow to his son. The aggregate and juvenile forms had 2 sets of jaws. The inner jaw was primarily used to latch onto his victim and inject them with the toxic micro-oxygen. He also used the inner jaw to drain their energy completely. These 2 forms had pincers and spikes, which gave him the appearance similar to a praying mantis. Destoroyah's final form could also drain the energy of his opponent using his forked tail. He did this while he dragged Godzilla towards Tokyo Bay with his tail wrapped around the Big G's neck. Destoroyah had the unique ability to absorb other creatures' DNA. When Destoroyah bit Godzilla Jr., not only did he imbue the kaiju with micro-oxygen, but he also absorbed some of his Godzilla DNA. Thus, Destoroyah's exoskeleton evolved into an internal skeleton composed of tough tissue that enabled him to move around easier. This fact was revealed in the book Godzilla vs. Destoroyah Super Complete Works. Another lethal weapon that Destoroyah had in his arsenal was his horn, which he grew when he reached his flying form. The horn, which is also known as the horn katana or laser horn, had the ability of the variable slicer. The horn produced a wave of energy which was sharp enough to cut through Godzilla's flesh. An interesting power that was cut from the film but can be found in the manga is the stomach beam. Destoroyah was initially meant to have an energy beam shoot out from the floral patterned opening of his stomach. In the manga, the beam is shown to be harmful enough to burn off a chunk of Godzilla's tail and one of his dorsal fins. In the Pipeworks video game, Godzilla Unleashed, Destoroyah possesses the abilities of oxygen mines, which are balls of energy pulses derived from the oxygen destroyer, which knocks out his opponents. In the game Giga Bash, Destoroyah can reach a form that is considered the S-class form. This happens when he absorbs sufficient Giga energy and can grow even larger. Unveiling the vulnerabilities that haunt Destoroyah. Even a formidable kaiju like Destoroyah isn't immune to weakness. As we've already seen, extreme temperatures didn't fare well with the colossal crustacean. Initially, his juvenile forms were destroyed by the flamethrowers utilized by the Japanese self-defense forces. Even Godzilla's atomic breath eventually dealt enough damage to Destoroyah that he had no choice but to flee. It is also revealed that if the fused mini-Destoroyah are attacked before they can disperse, it will result in permanent death. The same reason why Godzilla managed to kill Destoroyah. It was when Godzilla reached a state of near-nuclear meltdown and fired his spiral heat ray that burned through Destoroyah's hide. The combination of Godzilla's overheating and the Japanese self-defense forces' cryo-lasers proved fatal in the end. In the comic book miniseries titled Godzilla Legends No. 1, a Freon bomb was dropped on Destoroyah by Colonel Matsumiya using a helicopter. This froze Destoroyah in place and allowed the kaiju named Anguirus to charge towards him. In another comic called Godzilla Rulers of Earth No. 12, Destoroyah was frozen via the Absolute Zero Cannon by the heroic robot Jet Jaguar. The Absolute Zero Cannon was first featured in Mechagodzilla's arsenal. As the name of the weapon insinuated, the cannon froze Destoroyah to a temperature below zero. Jet Jaguar then grew larger than Destoroyah himself and crushed him. When Godzilla aimed his atomic breath right into Destoroyah's chest opening, it caused him to bleed relentlessly and even vomit some blood. This shows us that Destoroyah's flower-shaped chest cavity is a vulnerable point for him. The third time, Godzilla shot his beam into the opening and followed it by punching Destoroyah. It rendered him gravely wounded. Immediately, Destoroyah split into several smaller aggregate forms. Mind-blowing appearance of Destoroyah in other forms of media. The book Godzilla Project Mechagodzilla is a tie-in novel and a follow-up to Godzilla Monster Apocalypse. The story followed is that of Dr. Kinsaku Ijuin, studying a particular species of microorganisms named as JMO7. Dr. Kinsaku carried out the research in a deserted Hedora research facility. While under research, trillions of these microorganisms amalgamated into one crab-like creature. The scientists theorized that this life form could be related to the kaiju known as Ganymedes. Apart from these series of novels, Destoroyah has been featured in several Godzilla comic book series. For instance, in Godzilla Legends No. 1, Destoroyah fought off most of the army and stampeded through Sydney, Australia. A device known as the G-Signaler was used to call upon Godzilla, but the kaiju Anguirus was summoned instead. The ultimate battle took place between Destoroyah and Anguirus. In Godzilla Rulers of Earth, the undersea alien race created Destoroyah as a biological weapon. Then they unleashed several juvenile Destoroyah in San Diego, where they stormed a comic convention and killed many of the goers. In Godzilla Cataclysm, the protagonists of the story, Hiroshi, Arata, and Shiori, wanted to protect Biolante's core while a raging battle between Godzilla and Mothra ensued. Hiroshi could physically sense the presence of Destoroyah, who was also being referred to as a demon. In this story, Destoroyah not only managed to fight off Godzilla, but also mortally wounded Mothra. Biolante saved the day. In Godzilla in Hell, the king of the monsters fought an eternal battle against a demon Destoroyah and a devilish King Ghidorah. Godzilla was constantly attacked by both the deadly kaijus, with Destoroyah flitting back and forth between his various forms. Lastly, in Godzilla Rivals, Biolante vs. Destoroyah, the plant hybrid kaiju was unleashed on the world. In this story arc, Destoroyah is a kaiju that was genetically engineered in a lab solely for the purpose of retaliating Biolante's assaults. The future of Destoroyah in the Godzilla universe. The revived MonsterVerse has already seen so many unique additions to it. In all of Toho's iconic Godzilla movies, Destoroyah has appeared only once so far. As a Godzilla villain, Destoroyah holds so much potential and room to be discussed even more in depth. Going forward, fans can expect to see antagonists like these to feature in future films of the franchise. Destoroyah's origin story has already been explored in the 1995 movie. Quite similar to even Shin Godzilla, Destoroyah was created in unnatural environments caused by human meddling and evolved through many forms. The motive for Godzilla to face off with this kaiju has already been laid out, which is that Destoroyah killed Godzilla's son. Destoroyah also killed countless innocent people with great relish. This could be the point of change for Godzilla and how he views humans. Instead of neutral indifference, the Big G could turn into the defender of humans. For any future films, a potential plotline could see Destoroyah teaming up with other villainous titans to fight against Godzilla or even Kong. Some are even of the belief that Destoroyah could be featured as the endgame villain for the MonsterVerse franchise. Naturally, he would need to be more wise and not show up to the fight alone. There is a possibility of Destoroyah having bred a highly skilled army just for his fight against the King of the Monsters and the King of the Apes. All the kaijus that have sworn alliances with Godzilla and Kong could come together in the end to fight against the demonic Destoroyah. However, fans also believe that the way the Oxygen Destroyer was introduced in the movies makes it harder for Destoroyah to be incorporated in any future storylines. Marvelous verdict. So here we come to the end of our video. This man-made abomination is also a culmination of millions of years worth of evolution and mutation. Destoroyah represents how little control humans actually have over how nature functions. He is the kaiju paragon of chaos, disorder, and death. In the King of the Monsters universe, Destoroyah has been considered to be like the Grim Reaper. We can only hope that he has done justice in the potential future of the MonsterVerse. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.